in a society like Armenia, your self-worth as a female is tied to you having kids.
I think of motherhood as one of those only things in life that has polarizing feelings at the same time.
When you have a kid, this guilt just is blown out of proportion.
Use this as something that inspires you instead of causing it that like jealousy or the bad feelings. Use it as something that you can say, I can't wait to do that one day.
On a daily basis, maybe even hourly in some cases, I'm not sure, but you prioritize certain things and you're wearing just that one hat. You're not thinking about anything else.
I've neglected my laundry for the day. I've neglected housework. It's impossible for me to be amazing at everything.
In some cultures, in some societies, the priority is the men, which in Armenian society, that's the case.
Weird. I'm getting emotional.
Thank you so much for being here, Gayane. I appreciate you taking the time and chatting with me today.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to dive right into the most important topic for today, which is basically motherhood is challenging, it's tough. But I want to talk a little bit about the social pressure that people put on mothers, especially ambitious women who have careers or who are working and are maybe entrepreneurs. They have this pressure to have kids. And specifically, if we look at a society like the Armenian society, for instance, we hear, if you go to Armenia and you are, let's say, over 25 years old, you constantly hear people telling you, you need to have children. Why didn't you have children yet? What's wrong with you? And it seems like in a society like Armenia, your self-worth as a female is tied to you having kids. And then if we look at the States, at the Western societies, it's more like it's not so much pressure in terms of people don't tell you have kids and you should have one, but there is still some stigma around like women not having kids, and you still feel somewhat of a pressure. My question to you is, how should women respond to this criticism, sometimes questions that can be hurtful, without being triggered? Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, I think it matters on who your audience is, right? Like you said, if it's, if you're in the States, that conversation is going to sound a little bit different. And I believe that there are certain cultural norms here and expectations. And I think that people don't ask as much in the States. And it is different in Armenia, of course, and they live a different life. And so I think knowing that they're not coming from a bad place can be really helpful to not let it trigger you. And that this is what their norm is, right? For us, the norm is a working mom or a mom who is like, entrepreneur, or like woman, maybe having their career first and then their kids, or maybe not even having kids. This is more of a Western culture. It's more of what we see here in the States. And so I do think just knowing that it doesn't come from a bad place is a good start. And the way you respond to that really depends on who you're speaking to. If you're comfortable on saying, that's not a topic I want to discuss, you can say something like that. If you have to kind of be a little bit more political, you can say in God's timing, or whenever the time is right, you can play it off like that. But I also think it's totally okay to set some boundaries and say, I'm not comfortable speaking about that.
Yeah. That's the responding part of it, right? I mean, whatever you mentioned, like, obviously, like, that's what I try to do, because when I go to Armenia, that's probably the first thing people tell me. Like,
Yeah.
where are the kids? Like, you're alone? Okay, you're not worth it. So that's at least how I perceive it. But then you still get triggered internally, right? And maybe the first thing you said, which is understanding that they're not coming from a bad place, is important. And I totally agree with that. But are there any tips you would give a woman to maybe think about this differently and approach this a little bit differently?
Well, as a therapist, my first thought is, where is the trigger coming from, right? Because if you are confident in your choice, you won't be triggered the same way. So my guess is, and I'm not saying this it's like that for you, but maybe for some people who are really triggered, my question would be, what about this is triggering for you, right? Do you also feel like you should have a child, you should do this? And when someone asks that, maybe it like touches a nerve for you. Because reality is, if you're confident about your decision, people can ask all day long and it's not going to touch that nerve. It's not going to strike the same type of reaction out of you. So it's a good opportunity to look within if you're noticing having a reaction like that.
Yeah, I love that. It's a
Yeah.
very soothing answer. And I totally agree. Like, if we don't have certain things internally, no matter what happens, it's not going to trigger us because it's not going to resonate with us as much.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, let's dive into the next thing, which is the fear of having children. So, if we think about ambitious women, successful women, or both, we women just generally tend to have this fear of having kids because they think that it's going to ruin their life. It's going to, minimize their chances of success. They're not going to be able to achieve their dreams. Things are going to collapse. And I want to kind of talk a little bit and unpack this fear and understand if these thoughts women have are unfounded, or how do we approach this fear?
Yeah, well, I do like when people are actually afraid of having kids, because I'm always a little bit like taken aback when people are just so positive about it and they don't think of all the things that it does change your life. And so when I hear people be afraid, I'm like, okay, good, you should be afraid, because this is life's biggest, hardest job in the whole entire world, right? And I don't think, frankly, people put enough thought into having kids. I think it's just something we do. And nobody really thinks of like what it entails. So I always think it's good to think about it, but of course we never want fear to be in the driver's seat and to prevent us from actually doing something that we would like to do, right? But we can use fear as something that can get us to think about things. And yes, of course, it changes your life and it changes things a lot, but I do believe that it doesn't keep you from being successful. I mean, I can just speak for myself. I think it's a force behind my success. I'm definitely I'm in the best place I've been in my career. And I had my son 4 years ago, and I'm doing things this year that I never thought I would do, like being a panelist and just doing more podcasts. And that's not something I would have done before I had him. So I do believe that he's given me some sort of like purpose and passion to just be even better at this, right? So I think that's a very fear-driven thought. And the reality is that if you can, organize your time and prioritize certain things, I do have to say that the concept of doing it all is not real. So I personally don't believe in that. On Instagram, it may look like, even for what I post, someone will always message me and be like, oh my God, like it's so cool. You get to do everything. And I always make it a point to say, this is just the highlight reel. You're just seeing my highlights of the day. You're not seeing how difficult my morning was. You're not seeing how, I've neglected my laundry for the day. I've neglected housework. It's impossible for me to be amazing at everything. And
Yeah.
the approach I like to take is I'm going to give myself like two things to focus on for the day to be amazing at, so to say, right? So for example, today is a full work day. So today I'm only focused on work. Maybe during a break, I might think of something like my son needs socks or he needs something. I need to purchase something. But most of the day, I'm wearing my therapist hat today. So my house looks like a mess today. It is like there's stuff in the hallway, there's Amazon packages not open. It's okay because I can't unless I wake up at like 4 a.m., which like would not be great for anybody, it's impossible for me to do it all. So I really like the concept of you don't have to have it all figured out. I don't know if that answers your question. I can talk hours about this.
It does. It does. And I love it. I love that you're being real, and it's just a few things here to unpack. So it seems like you are doing it all. It's just you are doing it all at different times. So
Yeah.
you're on a daily basis, maybe even hourly in some cases. I'm not sure, but you prioritize certain things and you're wearing just that one hat. You're not thinking about
Absolutely.
anything else when you're doing that. Is that correct?
Yes, and I would say that, it's deciding what each day is going to look like, what's going to get priority. If you haven't maybe spent time with your husband and you realize that's a bucket that's like you haven't filled anything into, maybe you look at your calendar and I'll do this. I'll schedule date night. Having something recurring. Like right now, we're doing every 2 weeks. It's every other Friday, and it's just there. So neither of us have to plan it or think about it. It's just there, unless something comes up. But it's impossible for me to like be at work, think of my son, think of my husband, think of my housework. It's just that's a recipe for a disaster. I would stress myself out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Already
So
life is so stressful.
yeah, I love that. And you mentioned your husband. So I think maybe smoothly also touch basing on this, how important it is the relationship that you have with your partner in how is it contributing to you making sure that you manage things and you manage all of the aspects of your life well?
I can't imagine having someone who is not as supportive as my husband is. Weird, I'm getting emotional. But really, because even today, I have a really long day, and last night I was like, I need you to take him to school. Usually it's my I'm the default parent, and my husband works a lot more than I do. Um, but I had asked him Tuesday, and then I was like, you know what, I also need Thursday, and he was like, sure, no problem, like no questions asked. And I got an extra 30 minutes to get myself together, get everything I need ready. And if I didn't have that support from him, again, I would have to wake up probably at like 4 o'clock in the morning and do all of this myself. So it's extremely, extremely important. Truly, I wouldn't be able to be where I am if it wasn't for him. Especially with having a child, I think the way he supported me still pursuing what I do. I remember when my son wasn't in school or if he would get sick, and the way my job is like, I don't typically cancel on my clients, even if like my son is sick or unless obviously there's like a true emergency. And so he would stay with my son and take away from his business and his work just so I can go see my clients.
It's
And
amazing.
yeah, and that's something that I don't take for granted. I think that again, without him, it would be just more difficult. It's doable, of course, but having that kind of support gets me way further.
Is he Armenian?
Yes, yes,
That's so surprising.
yeah,
I
yeah,
cannot believe that. Is he
yeah.
from Armenian
No,
or
he was
born and
raised
raised?
here. Although he is very, I think the culture is definitely there. And
Yeah.
as a parent, I see him struggle with wanting to be like the more modern parent, but still within him, there's this like total cultural stuff that's still there. But I think also, we've been together since we were 16. And now I'm turning 32 this year. So it's been a very long time. And I think we've both molded each other into who we are and just really been there. It hasn't been easy. But I do think that's played a role in how we show up for each other.
Yeah. And I know you do a lot of couples therapy.
Yeah.
I guess, like, is there a way you could work with your partner before having children to ensure that you have that system figured out before even you have kids or as you're planning to have kids? Is there a way to figure out a system where you would know that you guys are partners in this, and there's a support that needs to take place. And it's just because in some cultures, in some societies, the priority is the men, which in Armenian society, that's the case, right? In most cases. But is there a way to come up with a system, and how do you recommend your clients to go about that?
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in preparing. Even if you don't know how things are going to be, just having these conversations, whether it's about what is it going to be like when, baby is here and baby wakes up in the middle of the night, who's going to be the first one to go. Whenever you think about these moments that haven't even happened yet, yes, you're absolutely just imagining a scenario, but it rehearses your brain to really know what to do when it happens. And so even if it's not about how things will be after baby, even for marriage, even for moving in together, to have couples therapy and to talk about what is it going to be like at home? Who takes out the trash? Who cooks? Who buys groceries? Because oftentimes, especially in our culture, we come into the marriage, into the relationship with these beliefs from our own families. And even if we're from the same culture, everybody does things differently. So in one household, the dad gets the groceries. In one household, the mom gets the groceries. And then two people get married. And each person is like, no, you should do it. No, I should do it. Like there's no understanding of what is our norm going to be. And I believe that talking about these things beforehand can prevent you from getting into those arguments. Talking about the expectations, what is hosting going to look like? What is just house chores? And the same applies to when you're going to have kids. I think it's important to talk about the roles. Some partners might say, I'm not going to change a diaper, or I'm not going to do this. And I think then the conversation needs to be, then what are you going to do? If you're not comfortable with that, how are you going to show up? Because I think modern day parenting, modern day relationships, even Armenian, there's this concept now, especially when the woman is working, it's kind of blurred the lines a little bit. If anything, I think before they had it easy. The husband went to work, the woman stayed at home and raised kids. Easy.
Yeah.
There's nothing to fight about. But now that women are getting into work, and also providing, there's this expectation, well, now you, the husband, also need to do what I do as a woman, which is like take care of the kids, show up, maybe do some housework. So it's gotten a little bit blurry in that sense from a cultural standpoint.
Yeah, I so much agree with that. I think it has turned into this thing where the woman now does everything. She works, she cooks, she cleans, in some cases, right? I'm not talking about all families, obviously, but she does everything, all the chores in the house, and then she also works. So now we are ending up with a stressed woman who just does not have time for herself, her husband, and it's just like constantly stressed with high levels of, cortisol coursing through her system. So very much agree with that. And it seems like such a, primitive, simple thing to do. Just talk about it before you get married, before you move in with each other, before you plan to have a baby. But we don't do that, I don't think.
Not even about finances, which is another huge topic where couples argue, right? Again, all about beliefs from how you were raised, what money conversations were like at home. And then two people marry each other and they have no idea how to discuss this, right? There's this expectation, there's these beliefs, assumptions, and no one's actually saying anything out loud until they fight. And so my job as a couples therapist is to make sure we have these conversations and we don't wait for the big blow up to happen to then find things out.
Yeah, which is what normally happens. You just stumble upon different topics to fight about where you're not planning way ahead.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I want to get back to the topic of the fear of having children and ask you, based on your experience, what are some reasons that women have this fear, have developed this fear? or some most common reasons that you've come across?
I think that awareness is a big factor. Because now we're exposed to social media, we're exposed to TikTok and people sharing their experiences, which is a blessing and a curse, right? The blessing because finally we're talking about what really happens, but a curse because it's kind of fear driven and it's making people really be afraid to make this decision. The other reason is, again, being in the States and maybe when you create a career and being at a certain place in your life, it's scary because, when you hear that it changes your life so much, you think that this is really going to mess things up, right? And again, it comes from this idea that you should have it all figured out, or you should have it all together and it should be perfect. But reality is it's messy, it's hard, it is difficult, but there's a lot of unexplainable, just truly unexplainable love and joy that comes from it too. I think of motherhood as one of those only things in life that has polarizing feelings at the same time. It's both love and frustration. It's both joy and maybe sadness. And you can truly feel that at the same time. You can be with your child and be so excited to see them, and then at the same time you might feel like this is so difficult. I miss my old life.
Yeah, that's so weird. I don't have kids, but I understand this so well for some reason. I just like, I can imagine a woman. Is it because we want to be at the same place in two different places at the same time? Is that what we're looking for in our lives?
Well, I think because there's this lack of preparation for this life, we assume that once we have kids, things will either be the same or it'll be perfect, or it'll be great, and lack of preparation. So we have two types of people. There are people who are just really scared and fear driven. So then they won't even make that, they won't take the leap because it's so scary that it's going to change their world. And then we have people who are like, it's going to be fine. Everybody does it. I'll have the same life. It'll all be okay. And then they get into it. And that's usually when the shock happens of how scary and different and difficult it is. And there needs to be some sort of a balance, right? Having this fear, but making the decision not from fear. Now, if someone truly doesn't want to have kids, and it's not fear driven, that's different. That's just their personal choice. But if it's fear driven, there's a lot to unpack there. And again, we also live in a society where there's a lot of sicknesses and scary disorders and diseases and all just these things that are now, the foods we eat and the environment where that also increases the fear in a lot of people. I've definitely heard people express that for sure.
Yeah. And you also mentioned social media. I think social media just exacerbates every fear that we have.
Yeah.
And I love it that you were a little bit before you mentioned that you only show certain highlights from your day, for instance. And so we from the outside just have this impression of you having this ideal life, that you have it all fit to put together. So you're just working or you love your job, which is true, right?
Yes.
But then we don't see the messy parts of your job.
Yeah.
We just see you at this panels looking nice and pretty. And then we know that you have a kid, you have a husband. So what we see, what we perceive is this wonderful, beautiful life. But then when someone has a kid and they're like, but wait, Gayane had this amazing life. Mine looks like shit. Why?
Yeah.
What is going on?
And I mean, look, I think it's hard because I think I definitely talk about the hardships. I don't show it because I don't know if my son's having a tantrum, the first thought isn't let me film this and put it on Instagram. That's strange to do. And even if I'm going through a hard time in marriage or life, again, my first thought isn't let me record this and put this out there. But I am open and talking about it and sharing how difficult this journey is. And so my hope is that and I try as much as possible to be like, remember, this is a highlight reel. This is not reality. Even, I made I was making a video of like a day in the life, and I was finding myself like not filming at certain points. And then I filmed like a day later, and then I put it all together. And I'm like, how? This is so fake. Like,
Yeah.
it's not actually a day in the life because I forgot to film it, right? But we see that on Instagram, and we're like, wow, this is like a perfectly curated day in the life of somebody. Or if they do the whole like waking up and
Yeah.
all those things, it's all. And I'm not talking bad about social media because I think it's a good distraction and we all
It's a good
indulge in
tool.
it. It's a good tool, but you always have to remember that that's not reality. It's just
Mm.
not. I always think of it as like a photo album. If you like think of old school photo albums, no one ever put like crying pictures or like stressful situations. It's just good pictures. Of course, the hope is, as someone who puts things out on the platform, is to make that change, make that someone feel seen, make that someone feel like, wow, like this person gets it, and even the positive things I post of like my work and my day, I also post that for inspiration too. Like,
Yeah.
I used to do a self-care series of like, how did you take care of yourself? And here's how I took care of myself. And I would
Mhm.
get a few moms saying, oh, I can't even imagine doing this. Like, this feels like so out of the phase that I'm in. And I would always say, I totally get it. And this phase will pass, but use this as something that inspires you instead of causing it that like jealousy or the bad feelings. Use it as something that you can say, I can't wait to do that one day. And that was
Mm.
really my goal behind that, is like, let's inspire each other so we can take care of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
again, in our culture, that's I mean, a whole nother topic, that self-care aspect, non-existent.
Yeah. What are you talking about? You have depression. Like it's stupid shit for us. Like we
Yeah.
don't believe in that at all.
Yes.
Which
Yes.
which brings me to the other topic, which is mental health and motherhood in general, right? It's a huge topic, but if I think about myself, I go through, let's say, in a month, I have so many different mood swings just because my hormones are all over the place in certain times of my month. And then, let alone when you're growing a human being in your body, then I mean, their hormones are all over the place, like the mood swings and everything. So I believe that in our culture specifically, if we think about the Armenian culture and the culture similar to Armenian, we just brush this, sweep this under the rug, and we think like this is not important. You want to get ready for having a baby? Great. Put maybe your finances in place, make sure that you have a house, you have a warm place to live, but then you forget to take care of the mental health of the most important person who is carrying the baby, right? What advice do you give women? How should they start preparing mentally for going through this phase?
I 100% agree. I don't think there's enough education, information, or even the like social acceptance to discuss these things, right? Like, instead of saying, oh, like maybe you should start therapy to like really work on this stuff. So when you're a mom, it's maybe easier for you. We say like, I don't know, what's going to be your diaper bag, or what stroller are you going to get, right? So I think that needs to change, definitely. And I'm a big advocate, of course, for therapy. But I think that the way someone who is expecting can prepare for the postpartum period is to, start therapy, because it's much better to have someone you already trust and have a relationship with. So then if things go wrong, you already have that person, rather than being in the thick of it and then searching for someone to connect with. So I'm a
Yeah.
big advocate in doing, that preparation. And then also, of course, getting familiar with the different perinatal mood and anxiety disorders that can show up, right? Getting familiar
Mhm.
with symptoms, not so you can diagnose yourself, but so you can realize when these things are happening and when you need additional help. Oftentimes moms will experience postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety and not even know that they have it. They just think this is normal motherhood. And people around them are like, especially, you know, in our culture, again, coming from a loving place, but they'll be like, oh yeah, it passes. This is temporary. You know, what you're feeling is like, it's fine. It's okay. You're going to be fine. And in reality, it's like, no, this is someone who's really struggling and they need professional help to get themselves out of that situation.
I agree. And I also think some people have this stigma associated with therapy. Or in Armenia, we say, like, are you crazy? Therapy?
Yeah.
Like, they associate craziness with therapy. And like, yeah, but we do that. So for me, therapy is more just another approach to self-awareness. Like, how do you develop self-awareness? Sometimes we can't do it on our own because we cannot come out of our body and observe ourselves objectively. So we need someone to really guide us through this process, someone who has experience, who knows what you're going through, who knows that this is something common that women experience, for example, right? And I think that just looking at it from this perspective might be super helpful for some women. Like, it's an awareness, self-awareness journey. Like, it's your body, how it reacts to certain things, how it responds to having a baby, after having a baby. Yeah. So
Yeah, you're absolutely, you know, you don't even have to necessarily have a diagnosis to go to therapy, right? Like, it's just something that can help you get more aware, become more aware about yourself. It can help you understand yourself, your triggers better. And we all are triggered. You know, I have my own therapist because as much as I know this information, when it comes to my own life, I can't see things as clearly. And that's exactly what you're saying. Like, I need my therapist to say, like, hey, this is the pattern that's showing up for you. This is what you're doing. This is what's triggering you. Or ask me those questions that when it comes to myself, I have a hard time asking. And this is why therapists can't be friends with their clients or it be family members, because there's an emotional connection there. And when there are emotional connections with these relationships, it makes it really hard for someone to be unbiased and to give opinions or education coming from an unbiased place. Right. And that's what happens with my own life. I'm totally biased. I have my own emotional history with these people. So when it comes to them and how I react to things, even with my own son, right? Like, I get triggered by certain things, and it's so much harder for me to practice my own advice rather than someone from the outside saying, like, okay, this is what's happening. Let's change that up.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have our blind spots. We won't be able to see them.
Yes.
Let's get back to the topic of entrepreneurship and ambitious women trying to balance having children and also successful career. I remember you mentioned that after you had your kid, you became even more productive than you were before. So how is that true for everyone? And then how did you prepare for this journey that you ended up being so productive at the end of it?
I don't know if it's the same for everybody. I do hear that a lot. I think especially women who have careers really do become more productive because your time is really limited. And you learn how to master the time that you have. I do believe in, like, my calendar is my life. Every block is scheduled. I'll put things like doing laundry, even taking a shower, or like washing my hair, like a full shower. Just because if you have a few hours, typically, of having to do anything, you really have to narrow down what you're going to get done. Otherwise, you'll just end up scrolling on Instagram, and that's not good for anybody. So being really specific with your time, I think that's really helpful. My journey wasn't easy because the first 2 years that my son was born, I was working, I think, a day or two at the office. I think at the time I was doing mostly virtual, and I would have my mom or my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, they all like came to help and took turns, and my son wasn't in school. So I definitely didn't prioritize like getting far in my career during that time. I was just seeing clients. And then when he started school at 2 years old, that's when my schedule really opened up. That's when I started going to the gym again and like just really prioritizing things that make me happy. And I would say in this like last maybe 2 years or year and a half is when I really focused on growing my career. And again, it's all time management. Like, for example, I had a hard time with having someone else pick him up from school. I always wanted to be the one to drop him off and pick him up. And I think last year that was a big theme. And like, that was really hard for me to ask my mom to pick him up or my mother-in-law. And this year, I'm in a completely different place. Like, I think this week I've only taken him once or twice, just because it's a crazy week. And I'm not feeling the guilt and the burden of that. Like, I am very secure and like love him so much, but I also love my career and I'm doing both at the same time. So it takes time. I think it's different for everybody. It matters on your support system, who's there to help, right? It matters if you're sending your child to school, but then it really makes you just be productive with the time that you have. Sometimes it's not as fun because I feel like my day is always like back to back, running from one place to another. And right now, actually, one of my goals is to slow things down. Clearly, today was not one of those
Not the
days.
case.
Not the case, but I am very conscious. I'm really trying to, make sure I have a lunch break that's like not 30 minutes, to make sure that I'm not running from one place to another because obviously that's also draining. Just being really mindful of your time. I really think that's what's helped me. I write lists. I'm a big believer in organization. I think if you are an entrepreneur and a mom, you have to get the organization down. You need a system. That's for sure.
Yeah. I love that. I think having a system and developing it early on is super important. But then again, I also feel like sometimes, even I don't have kids now, but I have a system with my, like I have workout regime and then all of this. I've planned things, but sometimes things don't go as planned.
Yes.
And I always get the sense of guilt that I'm not managing my to-do list. I'm not hitting my goals. And I imagine that when you have a kid, this guilt just is blown out of proportion because now you have a guilt of not delivering at, let's say, you're in your career and getting ahead, and also guilt of not being present with your kid. How do you manage this guilt of this and the push and pull from your kid, career, husband, this and that?
I think guilt is part of being human. But it's a matter of, do we let the guilt, just kind of like the fear conversation we had, do we live our life guilt driven, where it's literally guilt sitting in the driver's seat and making all these decisions and making us feel really bad about ourselves? Or do we let guilt be just a passenger on the bus, right? Part of our feelings, not all of it. That's typically how I personally deal with guilt. Of course, it shows up again, like today, for example. I don't think I'm going to see him today because I'm going to get home pretty late. And I saw him in the morning, and like even saying that out loud, a part of me was like, oh, I'm not going to see him tonight. But the guilt is not going to be in the driver's seat where I like cancel my work event and I like go home to see him. I'm confident that like tomorrow we get to spend time together. We have the weekend ahead of us. Like it is going to be okay. Instead of guilt being so loud that I spend the rest of the day stressing, feeling sad and feeling bad, that's not going to do me any good. Right. And so I think there's this, if you can change that conversation to, okay, I'm feeling guilty about this. I sense it. But at the same time, I'm really doing my best here. Like tuning into the self-compassion can really help you battle that guilt to not be in the driver's seat.
So what I'm hearing is basically acknowledging the guilt that it's there because it's there. And most of the time we feel guilty, regret, all of this, so many emotions. Just acknowledging that the guilt is there and then practicing self-compassion. That's what helped you. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think it's something we need to do, not just in motherhood, but just in general on a daily basis. and
Yes.
practice it as much as we can. Um, uh, another thing that I've noticed from my friends who have become moms recently is that they've become more purpose driven. And I don't understand whether it's something that has to do with you're purposeful now because you have a baby, you have a responsibility for another human being, or you've just become something, the natural shift that happens in your body, in your brain, and you just become a bit more purposeful in your life. What is this shift? How has that manifested in your life?
Yeah, I think that's, exactly what I was talking about when it comes to work. And it's not just work. I mean, even to have a better relationship with my husband, like we had such a great foundation before we had my son. And then when we had him, it just rocked the ship, rocked the boat, it changed things up. And it was hard in the beginning to find a way to still stay connected, to have conversations that weren't all about our son. And as now 4 years into it, I can see that both of our purpose is to have a better relationship for us, of course, but for our son to see as well, to set an example. And of course, we're not perfect by any means, but I think that there's this purpose outside of just me and him, to be even better. Same with work. I'm not working for him per se, but I want him to see that I can, you can be really passionate about your work, and I want to set that example for him. And I'm very lucky that I get to do what I love, and I really just want to model that for him. And I think in every aspect, I think now, when I compare life before our son, and now life after him, everything we do at the core is all for him. Like even me doing self-care at the core is still for him. It's so I can show up better for him. It's so I can be a better person. I can be a better mom. I can be a better therapist for myself, but also at the core, that's the purpose. And even like health too, to be healthy. Like I'm so health driven, and, really prioritizing that. And again, it's like, I want to live a very long life. So, I can see his life. So it's very purpose driven for sure.
That's beautiful. So what I hear is that it amplifies the purpose that you already have, but it also adds a different dimension to it. And so now it's deeper, and it's maybe less selfish. I don't think that focusing on yourself is selfish, by no means, but it shifts the attention from you only to encompassing another human being into your life.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Have you become more confident after having the baby? I feel like that's a recurring.
Yeah. I mean,
Why do you
I
think
haven't
that?
thought about that. But I do believe there's a sense of confidence, because it's so hard, motherhood. And there's so much you do that you think you can't do it, and then you do it. It's almost like, this is a great example because I just started strength training. I've taken one class, just one. But I would always just lift like 5 pounds or 7 pounds. That was my max, okay? In like a cardio class. And so I attended this strength training class, and the instructor said, I'm going to walk around, and if I see, like, if you have a 10, I'm going to put a 15 or a 20. And I was like, my anxiety was like through the roof. I'm like, no, I can't do it. She's like, oh, you can. I was like, okay. So she put I think a 15. And through the class, I kept looking at the 15. And of course she said, like, if you don't want to, don't do it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to try it. And by the end of the class, I was like holding it here, doing the exercises, and I was amazed. That's such a great way to explain what motherhood is like, because you literally think you can't do something, and then it happens and you just do it. And it builds this confidence of like, wow, I'm capable of so much. Right. Even like going through birth, it's like before you go through it, you're like, how am I going to do this? And then you just do it. And there's several moments like that where you feel like there's no way I can do this. And then you do it. And I think that's what builds the confidence. You're like, okay, I got this.
That's a beautiful example. I love that. If you could leave just aspiring women who have this fear of having children, women who have dreams, basically, who have goals, who want to create stuff in their life, who don't want to stop dreaming, but also don't want to compromise on having kids, right? Because they want to do both without compromising one over the other. What is the one single thing that you would tell them if you could?
I think if you go into all of that with self-compassion and grace and the confidence that you can figure it out, I think that will be really helpful. I believe that those three things are really important in this journey. And it's not that you're going to compromise one or the other, it's that it's going to be different phases where one feels like is pulling you more than the other. But eventually you'll find your place. Everybody does. And that is true. Like, I think one thing we can say for sure is everybody figures it out. So yeah, I think that's what I would leave with.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Gayane. This was a wonderful journey for me. And I think you've shared so much about yourself and been vulnerable, but also really given hope, and at the same time grounded us in a way that it's not all, unicorns pooping butterflies type of thing, right? It's hard. It's real hard work, but at the same time, it's such a beautiful journey. And you don't have to, women should understand that we don't have to compromise. We just have to plan ahead and just go through this journey mindfully and fully aware. So thank you for sharing this.
For having me. This was amazing.